My brother-in-law stood in the middle of my company's 25th anniversary celebration and told 300 people that I was having an affair. He said this while projecting photos onto the screen behind him. Photos of me with a beautiful 25-year-old woman. Photos of us at restaurants. Photos of me at a luxury apartment building I'd been renovating. Photos that made it look like I was keeping a mistress in a place I'd built with my own hands. His name is Derek Chen. He's married to my wife's younger sister, and he was telling our clients, our employees, our friends, and my wife Sarah that I'd been cheating on her for 6 months, that I'd been using company money to support another woman, that everything they thought they knew about Mike Patterson and Patterson Construction was a lie. Sarah stood next to me, her face completely white. Our 2 kids, Emma and Josh, looked like they'd been punched in the stomach. My employees were staring at me with confusion and disappointment. My clients were whispering to each other, probably wondering if they should take their business elsewhere. Derek clicked through more photos. Me handing the young woman an envelope. Me hugging her outside a coffee shop. Me driving her somewhere in my truck. All of it looked damning. All of it looked exactly like what Derek was claiming it was. What none of them knew was the truth. The truth about who that young woman really was. The truth about why I'd been seeing her secretly for 6 months. The truth about why I hadn't told Sarah or anyone else what was really happening. Tomorrow is Sarah's 48th birthday. I'd planned to tell her everything tomorrow. Had a whole plan for how I'd explain it. How I'd introduce her to the young woman in those photos. How I'd share the secret I'd been keeping since March. But Derek had destroyed that plan. Had taken something complicated and beautiful and turned it into something ugly and false. Had weaponized my secret to destroy my marriage, my business, and my reputation. What Derek doesn't know is that I have proof, documentation that will expose his lies and reveal the truth, evidence that will show everyone exactly who that young woman is and why I've been helping her. But to understand how we got here, to understand how my brother-in-law could stand in front of 300 people and destroy my life with carefully selected photos and malicious lies, I need to take you back to March of this year, when I got a phone call that changed everything. My name is Mike Patterson. I'm 50 years old, and this is the story of how a secret from my past became a weapon in someone else's hands, and how the truth is more complicated than any lie. I was born in 1974 in Columbus, Ohio, working-class neighborhood. My father was a carpenter. My mother worked at a grocery store. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. Dad taught me his trade starting when I was 12, how to measure twice and cut once, how to read blueprints, how to build things that would last. I was a good student, but not a great one, more interested in working with my hands than sitting in classrooms. I played football in high school, dated a girl named Jennifer Morrison my junior and senior years. First serious girlfriend, first love. We were inseparable. Summer after graduation, 1992, Jennifer told me she was pregnant. We were both 18, scared out of our minds. Neither of us ready to be parents. Neither of our families had money to support us with a baby. We talked about our options. Jennifer was accepted to Ohio State on a partial scholarship. I was planning to work construction with my dad. A baby would derail both our futures completely. Jennifer's parents were deeply religious. They didn't believe in abortion, but they also didn't want their daughter's life ruined by teenage pregnancy. They had a solution. Jennifer would go stay with her aunt in Michigan for the pregnancy, have the baby, give it up for adoption to a good family, then come back and start college like nothing had happened. I was relieved, ashamed to admit it now, but I was relieved. I was 18 years old and terrified. The idea that we could make this problem go away, that the baby would go to a good family who actually wanted a child and could provide for it, seemed like the best option for everyone. Jennifer left in October, told her friends she was taking a gap semester to work and save money, went to live with her aunt in Grand Rapids. I stayed in Columbus, worked construction, tried not to think about what was happening 4 hours away. Jennifer had the baby in March 1993, a girl. Jennifer's aunt handled all the adoption arrangements, private adoption through a lawyer, nice couple who couldn't have kids of their own, middle-class family who could give the baby everything we couldn't. Jennifer came back to Columbus in April, started at Ohio State in the fall. We tried to stay together, but it was too painful, too many memories of what had happened, too much guilt and loss that neither of us knew how to process. We broke up before Christmas. I threw myself into work, learned everything I could about construction, Worked for my dad for 5 years, saved every penny. In 1998, when I was 24, I started my own small contracting company, Patterson Construction. Just me and a truck and a toolbox. I met Sarah in 1999. She was a nurse at Columbus General Hospital. I was there visiting my dad after he'd had a minor heart attack. Sarah was his nurse, beautiful and kind and competent. We started talking, started dating, fell in love. I told Sarah about Jennifer and the baby I'd given up for adoption when we'd been dating for about 6 months. Told her it was something I thought about sometimes but had made peace with, that I'd been too young to be a father, that adoption had been the right choice, that I hoped my daughter had a good life with a family who loved her. Sarah understood, didn't judge me for it, said she respected that I'd made a difficult choice and took responsibility for it, that a lot of 18-year-old guys would have just bailed and left Jennifer to deal with it alone. We got married in 2001, had Emma in 2003 and Josh in 2005, bought a house in a good school district. Sarah kept working part-time as a nurse. My business was growing steadily. We were building a good life together. Patterson Construction expanded through the 2000s, started with small residential projects, gradually took on bigger jobs, commercial renovations, multi-unit residential buildings. By 2010, I had 15 employees and was doing over $3 million in revenue annually. The 2008 financial crisis was rough. Construction industry got hit hard. A lot of contractors went under, but I'd been conservative with debt and careful about which projects I took on. We survived, actually grew during the recovery, because so many competitors had disappeared. Sarah's younger sister, Lisa, married Derek Chen in 2012. Derek worked in commercial real estate, bought and sold properties, seemed successful, drove a nice car, wore expensive suits, always talking about deals he was working on. I never liked Derek much. Something about him felt off, too slick, too focused on appearing successful rather than actually being successful. But he made Lisa happy, so I kept my opinions to myself. Derek started asking me about my business around 2015, wanted to know about my finances, my profit margins, my growth projections, said he was interested in the construction industry, thinking about investing in contracting companies. I was polite but vague, didn't share specific numbers, didn't like the way he was probing, felt like he was sizing up my business like a property he might want to acquire. By 2020, Patterson Construction was doing really well. 25 employees, $5 million in annual revenue, diversified portfolio of residential and commercial projects, strong reputation in Columbus for quality work and fair pricing. I'd built something I was genuinely proud of. The COVID pandemic was challenging. Construction was deemed essential so we could keep working, but supply chains were disrupted, costs were unpredictable. Some clients delayed projects. We adapted, implemented safety protocols, stayed flexible, came through it stronger than many competitors. By 2024, business was booming, more demand than we could handle. I was considering expanding, maybe opening a second location, maybe bringing in a partner to help manage growth. That's when I got the phone call that changed everything. It was March 15th, 2024, a Friday afternoon. I was at a job site reviewing progress when my phone rang. Unknown number. Almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice. Young, nervous. She said her name was Amy Morrison. Said she was calling because she'd been searching for her biological father. Said that according to her adoption records, her biological parents were Jennifer Morrison and Michael Patterson. Said she'd found me through internet searches and public records. Said she'd been working up the courage to call for 3 months. I sat down on a stack of lumber. Felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My daughter, the baby Jennifer and I had given up for adoption 31 years ago. She'd found me. Amy said she wasn't trying to disrupt my life, wasn't expecting anything from me, just wanted to know her biological parents, wanted to understand where she came from, wanted to meet me if I was willing. I said yes immediately. Said I'd been thinking about her for 31 years, wondering what kind of person she'd become, hoping she'd had a good life, hoping someday I might get to know her. We agreed to meet for coffee the next day, a neutral location, no pressure, just 2 strangers with a biological connection trying to figure out what that meant. I didn't tell Sarah that night, told myself I needed to meet Amy first, needed to process what was happening, needed to figure out how to explain this to my wife and my kids. That was my first mistake. Amy and I met at a Starbucks on the north side of Columbus. I got there early, sat in my truck watching people come and go, wondering which one might be my daughter. Then I saw her, knew it was her immediately. She looked like Jennifer, same eyes, same smile, but she also looked like me, same build, same way of walking. It was surreal seeing my own features reflected in a stranger's face. We sat down with our coffees, awkward at first, two people who shared DNA but nothing else. But Amy was easy to talk to, smart, funny, self-aware about how strange this situation was. She told me about her life. She'd been adopted by Tom and Susan Morrison, good people who'd loved her and raised her well. She'd had a happy childhood in Grand Rapids, done well in school, graduated from Michigan State with a degree in graphic design. Her adoptive mother Susan had died from cancer 3 years ago. Tom had died last year from a heart attack. Amy was 25 years old and alone in the world. No siblings, no other family, just her and the biological parents whose names were on her adoption papers. She'd found Jennifer first, reached out to her 2 months ago. Jennifer had agreed to meet, but it hadn't gone well. Jennifer was married with 3 kids, hadn't told her husband about the baby she'd given up for adoption. Seeing Amy brought up painful memories she'd buried for 3 decades. She'd been polite, but made it clear she didn't want an ongoing relationship. Amy said she understood, said she wasn't trying to force herself into anyone's life, but she'd hoped that maybe I'd be different, that maybe I'd want to know her. I told her I did want to know her, that I'd thought about her every March 15th for 31 years, that I'd wondered if she was happy, if her adoptive parents were good people, if I'd made the right choice giving her up. We talked for 3 hours that first day, about everything, her childhood, my life, what we had in common, what was different, the strange experience of meeting someone you're biologically connected to but have no shared history with. Before we left, Amy said something that stayed with me. She said she wasn't trying to replace the parents she'd lost. Tom and Susan Morrison would always be her mom and dad, but she'd like to have some kind of relationship with me if I was open to it. Maybe not father-daughter exactly, but something, a connection to where she came from. I said I'd like that too, that I'd been given a second chance I never expected, that I wanted to be part of her life in whatever way felt right. We agreed to meet again the following week, to keep getting to know each other, to figure out what this relationship could be. I drove home that night planning to tell Sarah everything, planning to explain about Amy and the adoption and this unexpected reconnection. But when I got home, Sarah was dealing with a crisis at the hospital. One of her patients was dying. She was upset and exhausted. The timing felt wrong. I told myself I'd tell her tomorrow. That became the next day, then the next week, and before I knew it, I'd been meeting with Amy for a month without telling anyone. That was my second mistake. Amy and I started meeting regularly, coffee once a week, then lunch. Then I started helping her with things. Her car needed repairs and she couldn't afford them. I paid for it. Her apartment had a broken heater. I came over and fixed it. She was working freelance graphic design but struggling financially. I started giving her money, nothing huge, a few hundred here and there, helping her get stable. I told myself this was what any father would do for a daughter who needed help, that it didn't matter she was a biological daughter I'd just met, that I had the resources and she needed support, and it was the right thing to do. But I still hadn't told Sarah, kept telling myself I would, soon, when the time was right, when I figured out how to explain it properly. The longer I waited, the harder it got. How do you tell your wife of 23 years that you've been secretly meeting with the daughter you gave up for adoption, that you've been helping her financially without mentioning it, that you've been keeping this huge secret for months? I knew how it would look, knew it would seem like I was hiding something inappropriate, knew Sarah would be hurt that I hadn't trusted her with the truth, but I kept thinking I just needed a little more time, just needed to figure out the right way to handle it. That was my third mistake. In June, I found out that Amy's apartment building was being sold. The new owner was planning to renovate and convert it to high-end condos. All current tenants were being evicted. Amy had 60 days to find a new place. The Columbus rental market was brutal. Prices had skyrocketed. Amy couldn't afford anything decent on her freelance income. She was looking at places in bad neighborhoods, places that weren't safe for a young woman living alone. I had a solution. Patterson Construction had just finished renovating a small apartment building in a good neighborhood. I owned the building, had been planning to rent out the units. One of them would be perfect for Amy. Safe, affordable, close to areas where she could find better freelance clients. I offered her the apartment, said she could have it at a below-market rate, said I'd rather rent to someone I knew than a stranger, said it would give her stability while she built up her design business. Amy was hesitant, said it felt like too much, like she was taking advantage. I told her she wasn't, that I wanted to help, that this was what fathers did for daughters. She moved into the apartment in July. I helped her move, helped her set up, made sure everything was working properly, made sure she was safe and comfortable. I still hadn't told Sarah. Now I was in even deeper, not just meeting with Amy secretly, not just giving her money, but setting her up in an apartment I owned, using company resources to help her without disclosing why. I knew how bad it looked, knew I was creating a situation that would be almost impossible to explain, but I kept telling myself I'd figure it out. I'd find the right moment to tell Sarah everything, and she'd understand. That was my fourth mistake. Derek started showing up at job sites more frequently in August. Always said he was just in the neighborhood, just wanted to say hi, just interested in what we were working on. But I noticed he was asking questions about specific projects, about finances, about my schedule. I thought he was still interested in investing in construction. Didn't think much of it. Derek was always working some angle, always looking for the next opportunity. What I didn't know was that Derek was following me, taking photos, building a file documenting my meetings with Amy, creating evidence that could be interpreted in the worst possible way. In September, I started planning the 25th anniversary celebration for Patterson Construction. Big event. Invite all our clients and employees and subcontractors, celebrate what we'd built over a quarter century, showcase our projects, thank everyone who'd been part of our success. The event was scheduled for October 20th. I'd arranged for it to be catered at a nice venue, had invited over 300 people, planned to give a speech about the company's history and future, had a whole program organized. I also planned to finally tell Sarah about Amy, decided that October 21st, Sarah's birthday, would be the perfect time. We'd have the celebration. I'd tell her the next day, introduce her to Amy, explain everything, start integrating Amy into our family properly. I had it all worked out, or so I thought. 3 weeks before the celebration, Derek called me, said he needed to talk. Business opportunity he wanted to discuss. Could we meet for lunch? We met at a restaurant downtown. Derek ordered an expensive steak and wine, started talking about real estate markets, investment opportunities. Then he pivoted. He said he knew I'd been thinking about expanding Patterson Construction, opening a second location. He had a proposal. He'd provide financing for the expansion. In exchange, he'd become a partner, a 50% owner. We'd grow the company together. I said I wasn't interested in taking on a partner, especially not a 50% partner, that I'd built this company from nothing and wasn't about to give away half of it. Derek's face hardened. He said I should reconsider, said it was a very generous offer, said I might need a partner more than I realized, said things could get complicated for me without the right support. I asked what he meant by that. He smiled, said nothing specific, just that business was complicated, personal life was complicated. Sometimes having a partner made things less complicated. I told him thanks but no thanks, paid for my own lunch and left. Felt uneasy about the whole conversation, about the implicit threat in his words. 2 weeks before the celebration, Derek called again, said his offer was still on the table, said I should really think about it carefully, said that successful businesses needed protection, that reputations were fragile things. I told him to stop calling me about partnerships, that I wasn't interested and wouldn't be interested, that if he wanted to invest in construction, he should find someone else. Derek said I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand what I was turning down, that I'd regret it. I hung up, told Sarah about Derek's partnership pitch and weird behavior. She said her sister Lisa had been complaining that Derek's business wasn't doing well, that he was stressed about money, that he'd been talking about needing a big deal to get back on track. Sarah thought Derek was just desperate to find a good investment, didn't think much of his vague threats, said he was probably just trying to pressure me with salesman tactics. Neither of us realized what he was really planning. The night before the celebration, Derek called one more time, said this was his final offer, said he had information that could be very damaging to me, that if I accepted his partnership offer, that information would stay private, that if I didn't accept, he'd have no choice but to make it public. I told him I didn't know what information he thought he had, but I wasn't going to be blackmailed into a business partnership, that whatever he thought he knew, I wasn't interested in his threats. Derek said I'd regret that decision, that he'd given me every chance, that what happened next was my own fault. I stayed awake most of that night, worried about what Derek might do, what information he thought he had, whether it had something to do with company finances, with projects, with something I'd done wrong without realizing it. Never occurred to me it was about Amy. Never thought anyone knew about her. Never imagined Derek had been following me and taking photos and building a case that made it look like I was having an affair. The celebration started at 6 p.m. The venue looked great. Over 300 people showed up. Clients, employees, subcontractors, friends, Sarah and the kids. A huge turnout celebrating 25 years of Patterson Construction. I gave my speech around 7, talked about starting the company with just a truck and a toolbox, about the people who'd helped me build it, about the projects I was proud of, about plans for the future. Everyone applauded. People were having a good time, networking, eating, drinking, celebrating. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. Then Derek showed up. He wasn't on the guest list. I hadn't invited him. But he walked in around 7:30 with a laptop and a projector. He walked straight to the front of the room, set up his equipment, started connecting to the venue's display system before anyone could stop him. I started walking toward him, about to ask what he was doing, but then the screen behind him lit up. Photos of me and Amy. Derek's voice carried across the room. He said he had something important everyone needed to see, something about the man they were celebrating. Something that would change how they saw Mike Patterson and Patterson Construction. Then he started talking, started saying I'd been having an affair for 6 months, started showing photos of me with Amy, me and her at coffee shops, at restaurants, at the apartment building, photos taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, photos that looked exactly like what Derek was claiming they were. I stood there frozen, watching my entire life explode. Watching my wife's face go from confusion to shock to devastation. Watching my kids realize their father was being accused of cheating. Watching my employees and clients see me in the worst possible light. Derek showed bank records, payments I'd made to Amy, deposits into her account, money I'd given her for rent, for her car, for basic expenses. All of it looking like a man supporting his mistress. He showed the lease agreement for Amy's apartment, showed it was in one of my buildings, showed she was paying below market rent, made it look like I was keeping her in a place I owned so I could control her and hide the affair. The room was silent. 300 people staring at me. Sarah was crying. Emma was crying. Josh looked angry. My employees looked betrayed. My clients looked disappointed. Derek concluded his presentation, said he'd been concerned about my behavior for months, had felt obligated to investigate when he'd noticed suspicious patterns, had discovered this affair, and felt the truth needed to be revealed, said he was sorry to hurt his sister-in-law Sarah, but that she deserved to know the truth. Then he looked directly at me, said he'd tried to help me, tried to offer me a partnership that would have given me support during a difficult time, but that I'd refused his help, that I'd left him no choice but to expose the truth. That's when I understood. This was about the partnership, about me refusing to give him half my company. This was Derek's revenge and his leverage. Destroy my reputation, destroy my marriage, make me desperate enough to accept his terms, make me need a partner to help salvage my business and my life. I stood there in front of 300 people, my wife crying, my kids looking destroyed, my reputation in ruins, everything I'd built for 25 years collapsing around me, and I realized I had to tell the truth, all of it, right now. No waiting for the perfect moment, no careful planning, just the raw, complicated truth. I walked to the front of the room, stood next to Derek, looked out at all those faces, took a deep breath, and started talking. I said Derek was right that I'd been seeing the woman in those photos, right that I'd been meeting her secretly, right that I'd been giving her money and set her up in an apartment I owned. All of that was true, but it wasn't an affair. It was something more complicated. I said 31 years ago, when I was 18 years old, I got my girlfriend pregnant, that we'd given the baby up for adoption, that I'd thought about that child every day for 3 decades but never expected to see her again. I said that in March, I got a phone call, that my biological daughter had found me, that she wanted to meet me, that I'd said yes. I said the woman in those photos was Amy Morrison, that she was 25 years old, that she was my daughter, that everything Derek was interpreting as an affair was actually a father helping his daughter. The room stayed silent, but the energy changed. People weren't looking at me with judgment anymore. They were listening. I said I knew I should have told Sarah immediately, that keeping it secret was wrong, that I'd made the situation look suspicious by hiding it, that every day I didn't tell her made it harder to explain and more likely to be misinterpreted. I said I was planning to tell Sarah tomorrow, on her birthday, that I'd wanted to find the right moment, the right way to explain something so complicated, but that Derek had taken that choice away from me. I looked at Sarah, tears streaming down her face, not sure if she was crying because she thought I'd cheated or because I'd kept such a huge secret. I said I was sorry for not telling her, sorry for handling this so badly, sorry for making decisions alone that I should have made with her, sorry that she had to find out this way, in front of 300 people, from my brother-in-law who was using my secret as a weapon. Then I turned to Derek, asked him how he knew about Amy, how he'd gotten the photos. Derek said he'd been concerned about my behavior, that he'd noticed I was distracted, that he'd followed me a few times to see what was going on, that he'd discovered I was meeting with a young woman and felt obligated to investigate. I said that was a lie, that he'd been following me because I refused to give him a partnership, that this wasn't about concern for his sister, this was about leverage and revenge. I said he'd offered me a partnership 3 times, that each time I'd refused, he'd escalated his threats, that the night before this event, he'd explicitly tried to blackmail me, that he'd said if I didn't accept his partnership, he'd make damaging information public. I said Derek didn't care about Sarah or the truth. He cared about getting half of my company, and when I wouldn't give it to him, he decided to destroy me. Derek's face went red. He said that wasn't true, that he was just trying to protect his sister from a cheating husband, that I was twisting things to avoid responsibility. I said I could prove it, that I'd recorded our phone call last night, that I had Derek on tape trying to blackmail me into a partnership by threatening to release damaging information. That wasn't actually true. I hadn't recorded anything, but I wanted to see Derek's reaction. He panicked. His eyes went wide. He started stammering that recording phone calls without consent was illegal, that I couldn't use that as evidence. I said I found it interesting that he wasn't denying the blackmail attempt, just worried about whether the recording was legal. The room was turning. People were starting to see what was really happening, that Derek had weaponized private information to destroy me when I wouldn't give him what he wanted. Then someone in the back of the room spoke up, a woman's voice. Amy. She walked to the front. I hadn't known she was there, hadn't invited her because I was planning to introduce her to Sarah privately the next day, but apparently she'd heard about the celebration and decided to come. Amy stood next to me, looked out at the crowd, introduced herself. She said her name was Amy Morrison, that she was 25 years old, that Mike Patterson was her biological father, that she'd found him 6 months ago, and he'd welcomed her into his life when he didn't have to. She said she knew he'd been meeting her secretly, that she'd told him he should tell his wife, that he'd said he wanted to, but needed to find the right time, that she'd worried he was making it more complicated by waiting, but understood it was his decision to make. She said the money he'd given her wasn't to support a mistress, it was to help a daughter who'd lost both her adoptive parents and was struggling to survive, that he'd paid for car repairs when she couldn't afford them, that he'd helped with rent when she was going to be evicted, that he'd given her an affordable apartment in a safe neighborhood when she had nowhere else to go. Amy said she hadn't asked for any of it, that Mike had offered, because that's what fathers do. They help their children when they need it. She said Derek's presentation was the most cynical, manipulative thing she'd ever seen, that he'd taken something beautiful, a father and daughter reconnecting after 31 years, and twisted it into something ugly to serve his own agenda. Amy said she was sorry that Mike's wife and kids had to learn about her this way, that she understood how shocking and painful this must be, that she'd never wanted to disrupt their family, that she just wanted to know where she came from and have some kind of relationship with her biological father. She said if Sarah wanted her to disappear, she would, that she'd never contact Mike again, if that's what his family needed, but that she hoped maybe they could find a way to include her somehow, that she didn't want to replace anyone, that she just wanted to be part of the story. The room was completely silent, everyone processing what they'd just heard, the revelation that this wasn't an affair, but a secret daughter, the realization that Derek had deliberately created a false narrative, the complexity of the situation. Then Sarah stood up, walked to the front, stood facing me and Amy. Sarah's face was tear-streaked, but her expression was hard to read. Hurt, angry, confused, processing. She looked at Amy for a long moment, studied her face. Then she looked at me. Sarah said she could see it, could see me in Amy's features, could see this was really my daughter. She said she was hurt that I hadn't told her, that I'd been living with this huge secret for 6 months, that I'd made decisions about helping Amy without including her, that she'd thought we told each other everything. She said she understood why I'd been scared to tell her, why I'd been waiting for the right moment, but that there was never going to be a perfect moment for something like this, that I should have told her immediately and dealt with the complexity together instead of alone. Sarah said she needed time to process this, that finding out her husband had a 25-year-old daughter in front of 300 people wasn't how she'd imagined learning about this kind of thing. But then Sarah did something I didn't expect. She turned to Amy, looked at this young woman who was biologically related to her husband, and she said she was sorry. Sarah said she was sorry that Amy had lost both her adoptive parents, sorry that she was alone in the world, sorry that her first introduction to her biological father's family was this public disaster. She said she couldn't promise anything yet, couldn't say how she felt about all of this, needed time to think and process and figure out what this meant for our family. But she said Amy shouldn't disappear, that if Mike wanted a relationship with his daughter, they'd figure out how to make that work, that it might be complicated and awkward and difficult, but that families were complicated sometimes. Sarah said Emma and Josh deserved to know they had a half-sister, that they deserved the chance to decide what that relationship could be, that closing the door on Amy to pretend this revelation never happened wasn't the right answer. Then Sarah turned to Derek, and her expression changed. The hurt and confusion was gone, replaced by pure anger. Sarah said Derek had just destroyed his relationship with her family, that he'd humiliated his own sister in front of 300 people, that he'd weaponized private family information to serve his business interests. She said she'd heard about his partnership offers, about his escalating threats, about his attempt to blackmail me the night before, that she'd been too trusting when I'd told her about it, that she should have realized he was capable of something like this. Sarah said Derek needed to leave, that he wasn't welcome at this event or at our home or anywhere near our family ever again. Derek started to protest, started saying he was just trying to protect her, that I'd been lying to her for months, that she should be grateful he'd exposed the truth. Sarah said the only person who'd lied tonight was him, that he'd presented a father helping his daughter as a man keeping a mistress, that he'd created a false narrative specifically designed to destroy my life, that his motives had nothing to do with protecting her and everything to do with forcing me into a partnership I didn't want. She said if he didn't leave immediately, she'd call security and have him removed. Derek looked around the room, saw that everyone was staring at him with disgust, saw that his plan had completely backfired, grabbed his laptop and walked out without another word. After Derek left, I addressed the crowd, apologized for the disruption, said this wasn't how anyone had planned to spend the evening, said I understood if people needed to leave or needed time to process what had just happened. But I also said I wanted to be clear about something, that I'd made mistakes in how I handled learning about Amy, that I should have told Sarah immediately, that keeping secrets, even with good intentions, creates situations where those secrets can be weaponized against you. I said I'd spent 6 months trying to figure out how to integrate Amy into my life without disrupting my family, but that there was no way to do that without some disruption. That complicated truths are complicated no matter how carefully you try to manage them. I said Amy was my daughter, that I wasn't ashamed of that I wanted a relationship with her, that I hoped my family and my community could accept that, but that I understood if it took time. Then one of my longest-term employees, a man named Carlos who'd worked for me for 20 years, stood up. He said he'd heard everything tonight, had seen Derek's accusations and heard my explanation, and watched the whole situation unfold. Carlos said that in 20 years of working for me, he'd never known me to lie or cheat or do anything dishonorable, that I'd always been fair and honest and treated people with respect, that if I said the woman was my daughter, he believed me. He said he thought what I'd done, helping a daughter who'd lost her parents and needed support, was admirable, that he'd have done the same thing for his own kids, that being a father meant helping, Your children, even when it was complicated. Carlos said Derek had tried to destroy my reputation with lies, but that it hadn't worked, that everyone in this room who actually knew me would judge me by 25 years of character, not by one person's malicious accusations. Then Carlos started clapping. Others joined him. Within seconds, most of the room was applauding. Not everyone. Some people looked uncomfortable. Some left quietly. Some probably weren't sure what to believe. But the majority of the people there, my employees, my long-term clients, my friends, were showing their support. I felt tears in my eyes. After everything that had just happened, after having my worst secret exposed in the worst possible way, these people were choosing to believe me, choosing to judge me by the person they'd known for years, instead of the narrative Derek had tried to create. Sarah put her hand on my shoulder. Not quite forgiveness, but solidarity. A signal that we were going to face this together, even though she was hurt and angry about how I'd handled it. Emma came up and hugged me, said she was processing the fact that she had a sister, that it was weird and shocking but also kind of exciting, that she had a lot of questions but wanted to meet Amy properly, talk to her, get to know her. Josh was quieter. He shook Amy's hand, said he needed time to think about all this, but that he was glad his dad had helped her, that it was better than the alternative of finding out his father was actually cheating. The celebration continued after that, but in a different form. It wasn't the polished corporate event I'd planned. It became something more honest. People came up to me and Amy, asked questions, shared their own stories of complicated families, of secrets that came to light, of relationships that didn't fit neat categories. Some people asked Amy about her life, about her adoptive parents, about what it was like finding biological family as an adult. She answered graciously, handled the attention with a maturity that made me proud even though I couldn't really take credit for it. Around 9 p.m., most people had left, just close friends and family remaining. Sarah's parents were there. They'd watched the whole thing unfold. Sarah's mother came over and hugged Amy, said welcome to the family, even though this wasn't how anyone wanted introductions to happen. My employees stayed to help clean up, didn't want me to deal with the aftermath alone. Carlos and a few others kept saying they were sorry about Derek, that they'd always thought he was a snake, that they were glad the truth came out before I'd been blackmailed into giving him half the company. We left the venue around 10 p.m. Sarah, Emma, Josh, Amy, and me, the 5 of us sitting in my truck in the parking lot, not sure what to say, not sure what happened next. Sarah broke the silence, said we should go home, that Amy should come with us, that we had a lot to talk about and it needed to happen privately, not in a parking lot after the worst celebration in history. Amy hesitated, said she didn't want to intrude, that Sarah and I probably needed to talk alone, that this was a lot for everyone to process. Sarah said Amy was already intruded, that the secret was out, that hiding or pretending wasn't going to help anyone, that we needed to deal with this as a family, and that included Amy whether she felt like part of the family yet or not. We drove home. Nobody said much. Emma sent texts to friends explaining what had happened. Josh stared out the window. Sarah sat in the front seat processing. Amy sat in the back looking overwhelmed. At home, we sat in the living room. Sarah made coffee. We sat in a circle like we were about to have some kind of intervention or family meeting. Sarah started, said she wanted to understand the timeline. When had I first talked to Amy? How often had we been meeting? How much money had I given her? How I'd justified keeping all of this secret for 6 months. I explained everything. The phone call in March, the first coffee meeting, how we'd started seeing each other weekly, how I'd started helping her financially because she was struggling, how the car repairs and the apartment situation had escalated my involvement. I explained that I'd kept telling myself I'd tell Sarah soon, that every week I'd plan to bring it up and then chicken out, that the longer I waited, the harder it got, that I knew I was making things worse but felt paralyzed by not knowing how to explain something so complicated. Sarah asked Amy her perspective. Amy said she'd told me multiple times that I needed to tell my wife, that she'd been worried about the secrecy, that she'd almost ended contact with me because she didn't want to be the cause of problems in my marriage, but that I'd kept insisting I'd tell Sarah soon. I just needed to figure out how. Sarah said I was an idiot, that there was no perfect way to tell your wife you'd reconnected with a daughter from a teenage pregnancy, that waiting for the perfect moment was just cowardice disguised as consideration, that I'd made everything harder for everyone by being afraid of a difficult conversation. I said she was right. that I'd handled this terribly, that I'd let fear drive my decisions instead of honesty, that I'd created exactly the situation I'd been trying to avoid by trying too hard to avoid it. Emma asked Amy questions about her adoptive parents, about what she did for work, about whether she'd tried to find Jennifer too. Amy answered everything, shared that Jennifer hadn't wanted an ongoing relationship, which had hurt, but she understood, that her adoptive parents had been wonderful and she missed them every day, that she did graphic design work but was struggling to build a consistent client base. Josh asked the hard question, asked Amy what she wanted from us, whether she expected money or family status or something specific, whether she had some agenda in finding me. Amy said she just wanted to know where she came from, that when both her adoptive parents died within 3 years of each other, she'd felt completely unmoored, that she'd had this hole in her identity where her origins should be, that meeting me hadn't filled that hole entirely, but it had helped, that it was comforting to know where her features came from, why she was good at certain things, what genetic history she carried. She said she'd never expected money or help, that I'd offered everything without her asking, that she'd felt uncomfortable accepting but he'd insisted, that she'd be fine if we decided we couldn't have a relationship. It would hurt, but she'd survived worse losses. We talked for hours that night, going over everything. Sarah asking questions, Emma and Josh trying to understand, Amy trying to explain herself, me apologizing repeatedly for handling everything so badly. Around 2 a.m., Sarah said we all needed sleep, that this wasn't going to be resolved in one night, that Amy should stay in our guest room, that we'd figure out next steps in the morning. Amy protested again, said she had her apartment, didn't want to impose. Sarah said it was late, and we'd all been through enough tonight and Amy was staying. I showed Amy to the guest room. She looked exhausted, emotionally drained. She said she was sorry for showing up at the celebration, that she'd just wanted to see what kind of company I'd built, that she'd never meant to be part of the disaster that unfolded. I said none of this was her fault, that she'd done nothing wrong, that Derek created the disaster, not her, that I was the one who'd handled things badly by keeping secrets. She hugged me, said she was glad I was her father, that even though tonight was a nightmare, she was grateful to know me, that she hoped we could figure out a way to stay in each other's lives. I said we would, that my family might need time to adjust, but we'd figure it out, that she wasn't going to lose me now that we'd found each other. I went to my bedroom. Sarah was already in bed, sitting up against the pillows, not looking at me. I sat on the edge of the bed, started to apologize again. Sarah held up her hand. She said she understood why I'd been scared to tell her, that learning your husband has a 25-year-old daughter from a teenage pregnancy was a lot to process, that I'd probably been afraid of how she'd react, but she said fear wasn't an excuse for 6 months of secrecy, that I'd made decisions about our family, our finances, our life without including her, that I'd treated her like someone who couldn't handle complex information, instead of a partner who'd proven over 23 years that she could handle anything. She said she was hurt, not about Amy existing, not about me wanting a relationship with my biological daughter, but about being shut out, about not being trusted, about finding out in the worst possible way, because I'd created the perfect conditions for my secret to be weaponized against me. I said she was right, that I'd been a coward, that I'd let fear override trust, that I'd treated our marriage like it couldn't withstand complicated truths when it had withstood everything else we'd faced together. Sarah said we'd get through this, that she wasn't leaving me or shutting down, but that I needed to understand the damage I'd done by keeping this secret, that trust took years to build and moments to break, that I'd cracked something between us that would take time and work to repair. I said I understood, that I'd spend however long it took earning back her trust, that I'd never keep something like this from her again. Sarah said we'd figure out what role Amy would have in our lives, that she needed to meet her properly, get to know her, decide what felt right, that it wouldn't happen overnight but we'd work toward it. Then she turned off the light, turned away from me in bed. Not quite forgiveness, but not rejection either, just a signal that the conversation was over for tonight and we'd deal with more tomorrow. I lay awake for hours, thinking about everything that had happened, how Derek's attempt to destroy me had actually forced the truth out, how the worst way for my secret to be revealed had somehow resulted in my family beginning to accept Amy, how my cowardice had nearly cost me everything but honesty, forced honesty, had saved it. The next morning, Sarah's birthday. We had breakfast together, all 5 of us. Awkward, but real. Sarah asked Amy more questions about her design work, whether she'd thought about going back to school, what her long-term goals were. Amy said she'd thought about getting a master's degree in design, but that it was expensive and she wasn't sure she could afford it, that right now she was just trying to build up her freelance business and survive. Sarah said we should talk about that, about whether there were ways we could help, not just me secretly giving her money, but the family deciding together what support made sense. Emma said Amy should show them her portfolio, that she was interested in seeing what kind of work she did. Amy pulled out her laptop and showed her graphic design projects. Emma was impressed, said Amy was talented, asked if she'd ever thought about specializing in certain types of design work. They started talking about design trends and software and career paths. Josh joined in. He was studying computer science and had some overlap with design tech. Suddenly, my kids were having a normal conversation with their half-sister about work and interests and ideas. Sarah watched them talk, watched how easily Emma and Josh were connecting with Amy. Then she looked at me. Some of the hurt in her expression had softened, like she was seeing the possibility of how this could work, how Amy could become part of our family without destroying it. After breakfast, Sarah said she wanted to talk to Amy alone, sent the rest of us out of the room. They talked for over an hour. I don't know everything they discussed, but when they came out, both of them looked lighter, like some understanding had been reached. Sarah said Amy would come to family dinner every Sunday, that we'd get to know her properly, that she'd become part of our routine instead of this separate secret compartment of my life, that Emma and Josh deserved to know their sister, that complicated families were still families. Amy started crying, said she hadn't expected this, had thought Sarah would hate her or want her gone. Sarah said she didn't hate her, that Amy hadn't done anything wrong, that finding biological family shouldn't be a shameful secret, that the problem was never Amy's existence, it was how I'd handled it. That afternoon, I got a call from Carlos. He said we had a problem, that Derek was calling clients, telling them the affair story, leaving out the part about Amy being my daughter, trying to damage Patterson Construction's reputation, even though his plan at the celebration had failed. I asked Carlos what clients were saying. He said most of them weren't buying it, that the people who'd been at the celebration knew the truth. That word was spreading about what Derek had really done, but that some clients who hadn't been there were concerned, wanted to talk to me directly. I spent the next week calling every client personally, explaining the situation, that my biological daughter had found me, that I'd been helping her, that my brother-in-law had tried to frame it as an affair to blackmail me into a partnership, that the truth was complicated but not scandalous. Most clients were understanding. Some appreciated my honesty. A few were uncomfortable with the whole situation and ended their contracts. That hurt, but I understood. Some people don't want to work with someone whose personal life is messy, even if there's a reasonable explanation. Overall, Patterson Construction survived. Our reputation took a hit, but not a fatal one. The employees who mattered most stayed. The clients who knew me best stayed. We lost some business, but not enough to seriously damage the company. Derek's reputation, on the other hand, was destroyed. Word spread quickly about what he'd done, about the blackmail attempt, about weaponizing private family information, about creating false narratives to serve his business interests. His real estate business collapsed. Nobody wanted to work with him. Lisa filed for divorce 3 weeks after the celebration, said she'd been humiliated, that Derek had used her family for his own purposes, that she couldn't stay married to someone capable of that level of betrayal. Derek called me once about a month later, drunk, angry, blaming me for everything, said I'd ruined his life by refusing his partnership, that if I'd just given him half the company, none of this would have happened, that it was my fault his marriage ended and his business failed. I said he'd ruined his own life by trying to blackmail me, that the consequences he was facing were the result of his own choices, that I felt bad for Lisa, but not for him. He said I'd regret this, that he'd find a way to make me pay. I told him to get help, to stop drinking, to take responsibility for what he'd done. Then I hung up and blocked his number. That was 4 months ago. Derek hasn't contacted me since. I heard he moved out of state, trying to start over somewhere people don't know what he did. I wish him well, I guess, but mostly I just hope he stays away from my family. Amy has become part of our lives. She comes to Sunday dinners, joins us for holidays. Emma and Josh have embraced her as their sister. They text regularly, make plans together, treat her like she's always been part of the family. Sarah took longer to warm up. She was civil from the start, but distant, processing. But over these past 4 months, I've watched her relationship with Amy develop. They go to coffee sometimes, talk about design work and art. Sarah's been helping Amy research graduate programs and figure out financing. Last week, Sarah said something that surprised me. She said having Amy in our lives had been good for our family, that Emma and Josh had grown from the experience of having their assumptions challenged, that the family had learned to handle complicated truths, that even though my handling of it had been terrible, the outcome had been positive. She said she'd forgiven me for keeping the secret. Not forgotten, she made that clear, but forgiven, that she understood fear had driven my choices even though fear wasn't an excuse, that we'd worked through it and come out stronger. I asked if she'd really forgiven me, or if she was just saying that. She said both, that forgiveness was a choice she'd made even though the hurt hadn't completely disappeared, that she'd decided our marriage was worth the work of rebuilding trust. 2 weeks ago, we helped Amy apply to graduate programs. She's applying for a master's in design at Ohio State. If she gets in, we'll help her with tuition. Not just me, secretly, the family together, a decision we all made. Emma said she's excited to have a sister in grad school, that she'll be starting college in 2 years, and it'll be cool to have Amy around as an older sister. Josh said he's glad Amy's staying in Ohio, that it would be weird if she disappeared now that they'd gotten to know her. Yesterday was the first time Amy called Sarah and me to tell us something instead of just me. She'd gotten a big freelance contract, wanted to share the news with her family. Sarah congratulated her, said she was proud of her, said we should celebrate. We went out to dinner last night, all 5 of us. Sarah, Emma, Josh, Amy, and me. We talked and laughed and made plans for Thanksgiving. To anyone watching, we looked like a normal family. And in a way, we are. Just a family with a more complicated history than most. I think about Derek sometimes, about how his attempt to destroy me with my own secret ended up forcing me to be honest, how the worst possible way for the truth to come out somehow resulted in the best possible outcome. If Derek hadn't made his move, I might have kept delaying, might have kept Amy separate from my family, might have never integrated her properly into our lives. His betrayal forced me to stop being a coward and face the situation I'd been avoiding. I'm not grateful to him. What he did was cruel and manipulative and designed to serve his own interests. But I'm grateful for the outcome, for finally being honest, for my family accepting Amy, for learning that complicated truths don't destroy strong relationships. Hiding them does. I'm 50 years old. I've built a successful business over 25 years. I have a wife who forgave me when I didn't deserve it. 2 kids who adapted to having a sister appear in their lives, and a daughter I gave up at 18, who gave me a second chance at being her father. My brother-in-law tried to destroy all of that, tried to use my secret as a weapon to force me into a partnership I didn't want, tried to make me choose between my reputation and my business. But truth backed by honesty is stronger than lies backed by leverage. My family is stronger than Derek's manipulation. My reputation survived because the people who really knew me judged me by decades of character, not one person's accusations. The secret is out. Amy is part of my life openly now, and my family is better for it, even though it happened in the worst possible way. Derek thought he could destroy me with the truth. Instead, he just forced me to finally tell it, and that made all the difference. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story with love and respect.